The sun dipped below the hills in a slow, lazy crawl, setting the sky ablaze with colors too beautiful for the loneliness they overlooked. I leaned against the worn-out railing of the porch, sipping a cup of black coffee gone cold hours ago, staring out at fields that hadn't seen a proper harvest in years. Life here wasn't easy, but it was mine. Quiet. Predictable. Empty. I didn't mind it much, at least that's what I told myself when the silence got too loud to ignore. The old house creaked under the weight of the evening breeze, a sound I had grown so accustomed to it almost felt like a voice, a tired, groaning whisper saying I was still alive. I glanced at the empty rocking chair next to me, the one I hadn't touched since Mom passed away last winter. Losing her had cut deep, deeper than I admitted to anyone, even myself. She had been the last anchor to anything that made this place feel like home. Now it was just land and memories, stitched together by chores and silence. I ran my fingers along the rim of the chipped coffee mug, thinking about the letter I found that morning. A foreclosure notice. They were taking the farm. It didn't even hurt anymore. Numbness is what settles in when you've lost too much. I figured maybe it was time to leave anyway. Let the land breathe without me dragging it down. The sky darkened faster than usual, stars struggling to push through thick clouds that rolled across the heavens like an advancing army. A rumble, deep and throaty, vibrated through the air. Not thunder, something different. It was as if the earth itself shuddered. I stood up, mug slipping from my fingers and shattering against the porch floor, but I barely heard it. My heart hammered, a primal thud in my ears warning me that something was wrong. Then I saw it. A streak of searing blue light, slicing the clouds open, crashing somewhere past the tree line at the edge of the field. The ground trembled again, knocking loose an old lantern that swung violently from the porch beam. My breath caught. Every part of me screamed to run back into the house, lock the doors, pretend none of this was happening. But something stronger rooted me to the spot, curiosity. Fear, too, but not the kind that sends you fleeing. It was the kind that demanded you witness whatever came next. The air smelled strange, like burnt ozone and rain that had yet to fall. I took a hesitant step down from the porch. My boots crunched over gravel and dead grass as I moved toward the field. A sick, green glow pulsed in the distance. My brain scrambled for explanations: meteorite, secret military experiment, gas explosion, but none of them fit. It felt wrong, like the world had tilted on an axis it wasn't meant to. Halfway across the field, the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. I wasn't alone. I couldn't see anyone, but I could feel it, heavy and certain. I stopped, every sense straining against the unnatural stillness that had blanketed the night. Even the crickets were silent. Then they appeared. Not from the trees, not from the sky. 1 second there was nothing, and the next, 2 figures stood 10 feet away, framed by the throbbing green light. They were tall, slim, their skin almost translucent in the dark. Their eyes, enormous and silver, reflected the sickly glow like mirrors. They looked like children and elders at once, ancient and innocent. Twin beings, identical in every feature, clothed in something that wasn't fabric but shimmered like a second skin. I stumbled back, a choke sound escaping my throat. They tilted their heads in perfect unison, watching me with a gaze that pinned me to the earth harder than any gravity. I wanted to run. God, I wanted to run. But those eyes, there was no malice there. Only something that terrified me even more: recognition. Like they had been searching for me. One of them stepped forward, their movements fluid but hesitant. They raised a hand, fingers long and delicate, palm outward like a peace offering. I couldn't move. My legs refused to obey, my body torn between terror and something else rising up from deep inside me, a desperate need to not be alone anymore. A sound drifted between us, not from their lips but straight into my mind. A wordless ache, a song of loss so raw and pure it nearly dropped me to my knees. It was grief. A grief so familiar I recognized it instantly, even though it came from beings not of this world. It was my grief, mirrored and amplified. My mother's face, the empty chair, the cold fields. They knew. Somehow they knew. Tears welled up before I even realized I was crying. I raised my own hand, mirroring their gesture without thinking. The twins stepped closer, and the distance between us evaporated like mist under the morning sun. In that moment, something broke and mended inside me all at once. The loneliness that had anchored me to this dying place cracked wide open, and something new took root, a connection I didn't understand but couldn't deny. Behind the first twin, the second one mimicked the gesture, and suddenly I was enveloped in warmth. Not heat, but something deeper, wrapping itself around my heart like a mother's embrace. I choked on a sob, the pain too much to contain. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't alone. The night around us shifted. The green light faded into silver, bathing the field in a glow so soft it made the stars seem sharper, closer. And there, under the indifferent gaze of the universe, two alien twins who had no business knowing my pain reached out across the void, and found me. Everything was different now. And somehow, I knew it was only the beginning. I didn't know how long we stood there, hands almost touching, the night breathing slow and steady around us. Time didn't seem to matter anymore. My world had narrowed to the silver gaze of those beings, the soft pull of something ancient and powerful stitching itself into the hollow spaces inside me. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Fear had been stripped away, peeled off like old bark, leaving only raw, aching understanding. The first twin lowered their hand and took a step closer, so close now I could see the fine, shimmering patterns running beneath their translucent skin. Veins of light, pulsing in rhythm with my own heartbeat. Their mouth opened, but no words came, only a flood of images, pouring directly into my mind faster than I could process. Worlds beyond counting. Civilizations crumbling into dust. Starships adrift in oceans of void. And always, always, the same feeling, loss. A wound so deep it stretched across galaxies. I staggered under the weight of it, clutching my chest. It wasn't just sadness, it was annihilation. The memory of home worlds turned to ash, of laughter extinguished in the cold vacuum between stars. They were refugees, I realized, the last remnants of something that had once been vast and glorious. And now they were here, standing on the dying soil of my farm, looking at me like I was the answer to a prayer they had long since stopped believing would be heard. The second twin stepped forward, and for the first time, I noticed what they were carrying. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a tool. It was a seed. Small. Ordinary looking. Held reverently between two long fingers. They held it out toward me, the offer clear without a single word spoken. Take it. I didn't understand why. I didn't know what it meant. But somewhere deep inside, buried under years of loss and loneliness, something woke up and reached out. My fingers brushed the seed, and for a moment, everything else disappeared, the fields, the night, even the aliens. I was floating in endless space, wrapped in warmth, the seed glowing with a light that wasn't made of fire but of memory. When I blinked, I was back in the field. The seed rested in my palm, thrumming gently like a living heart. The twins watched me, their silver eyes shimmering with something that might have been hope, or desperation. Maybe both. The first twin pointed toward the farmhouse, then back to me, the meaning unmistakable. Plant it. Nurture it. Protect it. And just like that they were gone. No flash of light. No roaring engines. 1 second they were there, and the next, only the whispering grass remained, bending under a breeze that hadn't been there a moment before. I stood alone under the bruised sky, the seed burning softly against my skin, the weight of 1,000 dead worlds pressed into my hand. I stumbled back toward the house, half walking, half dreaming. The porch light flickered as I approached, the old wiring crackling in protest against the strange energy now clinging to me. I pushed through the door and made straight for the kitchen, clearing a spot on the counter with a reckless sweep of my arm. Broken plates shattered on the floor. I didn't care. I found an old pot buried under the sink, filled it with soil from a bag that had been gathering dust for years. My hands moved without conscious thought, guided by something bigger than memory or instinct. I placed the seed into the dirt, covering it carefully, almost reverently. As soon as the soil touched it, the pot glowed faintly, a soft silver pulse that matched the beat of my own heart. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I sat there on the floor, back against the cabinets, staring at the pot like a man watching a miracle he didn't deserve. Sleep clawed at my mind, but I fought it off. I couldn't look away. I wouldn't. And then it happened. The soil stirred. A tendril, thin and green and impossibly vibrant, pushed its way into the air. It grew before my eyes, uncurling with a grace and speed no earthly plant could match. Leaves shimmered with colors I didn't have names for. Vines laced the walls, covering the peeling paint with living light. Flowers bloomed, unfolding petals that sang without sound, filling the kitchen with the scent of something wild and eternal. The plant wasn't just alive. It was sentient. I felt it brush against my mind, tentative, curious, shy like a newborn deer stepping into an open meadow. It didn't speak in words. It spoke in emotions, in memories. It showed me a future where the barren fields outside teemed with life, where poison rivers ran clean and clear, where the broken bones of a dying planet knitted themselves back together under the patient, relentless force of rebirth. It showed me that it could heal this world. But only if I stood with it. Only if I fought for it. I pressed my hand to one of the glowing leaves, and the plant wrapped a tendril around my wrist. A bond formed in that moment, deeper than any oath spoken in courtrooms or battlefields. A covenant sealed not with words, but with need. It needed me. And somehow, impossibly, I needed it just as badly. A rumble outside shook the house, sending dust and broken plaster raining down from the ceiling. Through the cracked kitchen window, I saw lights moving along the road, trucks, black and heavy, carrying men who didn't come to ask questions. Men who had followed the crash, who had seen the sky torn open and come running with guns and greed. They wouldn't understand what this was. They would destroy it. I rose to my feet, every muscle trembling with exhaustion and fury. I looked around the kitchen, at the vines wrapping the old beams, the flowers lighting up the darkness with their steady, patient glow. I thought of my mother's chair, sitting empty on the porch. I thought of the cold, dead fields. I thought of the loneliness that had nearly buried me alive. No more. I grabbed the old shotgun from above the mantel, the same one my father had carried through wars and storms and worse. It was an antique, barely worth anything in this new, bitter world. But it was mine. It had been forged for times just like this, when a man didn't run, didn't plead. He stood. He fought. The trucks rumbled closer, their lights slicing through the darkness. I racked the shotgun, felt the solid, comforting weight of it settle into my hands. They were coming. And they were going to learn, the hard way, what it meant to threaten something a man had vowed to protect. Even if it cost me everything. Especially if it cost me everything. The first shot tore through the silence like a jagged blade, shattering the fragile peace of the night. I ducked low, heart hammering against my ribs as splinters of wood exploded from the doorframe. They weren't here to negotiate. They had seen something fall from the sky and figured it was theirs by right of force, by the same arrogant creed that had poisoned everything else they touched. They didn't see life in that plant. They saw control. Power. Profit. And they would burn this place to the ground to take it. Another shot rang out, closer this time, and I realized they weren't aiming to scare. They were clearing the way, systematically, like they'd done it before. Maybe they had. Maybe this wasn't their first harvest of something they didn't understand. The thought made my blood run colder than the night air ever could. I pulled back from the window, the shotgun heavy in my hands. It wasn't much against the kind of firepower they carried, but it would have to be enough. It wasn't about winning. It was about standing. About showing them that some things couldn't be bought, threatened, or taken by force. The plant trembled behind me, its tendrils retreating from the windows, curling protectively around the pot like a child hiding behind a mother's skirts. I pressed my hand to a thick vine, feeling its fear, its confusion. It didn't understand violence. It had never needed to. Where it came from, life was fought for differently. Here, though, it would learn. We would learn together. They kicked the door in, boots thudding against the warped wood, and poured into the house. Dark figures, masked and armored, weapons drawn and ready. I didn't think. I just moved. The first blast from the shotgun caught the lead man square in the chest. He dropped with a grunt, his weapon clattering against the floor. The others hesitated for a heartbeat, just long enough for me to dive for cover behind the heavy kitchen table. Bullets ripped through the air, snapping past my ears, chewing holes into the walls and cabinets. I waited, breathing slow and deep, counting the shots. When the rhythm faltered, when a man paused to reload, I popped up and fired again. Another body hit the floor. The air stank of gunpowder, sweat, and something sweeter, something growing and living even in the midst of death. They shouted at each other, trying to regroup, trying to flank me. I could hear their leader barking orders, could almost taste the frustration in his voice. They hadn't expected resistance. They'd expected an easy mark, a scared farmer, an abandoned ruin, a soft prize wrapped in dust and silence. They didn't understand who they were dealing with. Not yet. One of them got brave, tried to rush me. He crashed through the table, tackling me hard against the floor. Pain lanced through my shoulder, but I didn't let go of the shotgun. We grappled, fists and elbows flying, until I felt the muzzle of his pistol press against my ribs. In that instant, before he could pull the trigger, something surged across the room. A vine, thick and fast as a striking snake, wrapped around his wrist and yanked him backward. He screamed, dropping the gun, as the plant pulled him off me and slammed him into the far wall. I scrambled to my feet, gasping, and saw the vines coiling tighter, holding him fast. The others hesitated, weapons raised but unsure where to aim. That was my opening. I fired again, driving them back through the ruined door. They stumbled into the yard, regrouping behind the trucks. I could see them talking, planning, bringing out heavier weapons. They weren't going to leave. They were going to escalate. They were going to level this place if they had to. I turned back to the plant. It was growing faster now, fed by adrenaline, by fear, by need. Roots pushed through the floorboards. Leaves unfurled across the ceiling. It wasn't hiding anymore. It was fighting. Beside me. For me. I touched one of the vines, felt a pulse of energy jolt through my body, and suddenly, I could see them, clear as day. The men outside. Their fear. Their hatred. Their greed. I could feel the beating of their hearts, the tension in their fingers as they gripped their rifles. I could predict their next move before they made it. The plant was showing me what it saw. It was sharing its senses, its strength. Outside, the engines roared to life. They were bringing something big, maybe explosives, maybe worse. I couldn't hold them off forever. But maybe I didn't have to. I whispered to the plant, a wordless plea for help. For strength. For a miracle. It answered. The vines surged outward, smashing through windows and cracks in the walls. They snaked across the ground, lightning fast, heading straight for the trucks. Before the men could react, the roots coiled around tires, axles, doors, dragging the vehicles backward with impossible force. The engine screamed, metal groaned and tore, but the plant didn't relent. The men opened fire, panicked, bullets chewing through the vines, but for every tendril they shredded, 3 more took its place. It wasn't just a plant anymore. It was an army. A living shield. A furious, wild declaration that this place, this life, would not be stolen without a fight. I stepped outside, shotgun lowered but ready, and stared down the men who had come to take everything. They looked at me, at the vines tearing their machines apart, at the ground itself rebelling against them, and for the first time, I saw real fear in their eyes. One by one they broke. They dropped their weapons. They turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness with their pride in tatters and their greed unpaid. The trucks lay in pieces, the smell of oil and fear hanging heavy in the air. I stood alone in the yard, chest heaving, the shotgun slipping from my fingers into the dirt. I had won. We had won. But deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. Because whatever had drawn the twins here, whatever had brought that seed to this broken patch of earth, it wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about saving a farm. It was about saving a world that didn't even know how close it was to losing itself forever. And the real war was still coming. The government agents came 2 days later, unmarked cars crunching across the gravel drive with grim finality. They didn't wear uniforms, but their body language told me everything I needed to know. These weren't men sent to ask nicely. They were sent to clean up what the mercenaries had failed to erase. I watched them step out, their movements sharp, deliberate, their eyes scanning every inch of the battered farm. They thought they were walking into a simple recovery mission. They didn't know the ground beneath them pulsed with a new kind of life, a stubbornness born from more than roots and rain. I stood on the porch, battered and bruised but unbroken. The plant's vines curled around the foundation, hidden now, sleeping but alert. It knew better than to reveal itself again unless absolutely necessary. Its survival instincts had sharpened, just like mine. The agents approached slowly, one of them holding a clipboard like that would somehow shield him from the truth of this place. I didn't wait for their polite demands. I didn't bother with empty words or hollow refusals. They were going to take what they could, by force if necessary. That's what people like them did. They spoke of safety, of containment, of protecting the public. They spun half-truths and hollow promises into something almost beautiful if you didn't listen too closely. But I wasn't listening. I was watching. Watching how their hands twitched toward concealed weapons, how their eyes never quite met mine, how the tension in their shoulders betrayed the fact they expected resistance, and were prepared to crush it. They didn't understand what had taken root here. They didn't understand that this wasn't just about me refusing to hand over some anomaly. This was about standing against the kind of world where everything rare and beautiful was buried under fear and control. I told them no. It wasn't a loud refusal. It wasn't shouted or dramatic. It didn't need to be. It was a simple truth spoken with the full weight of everything that had happened, everything that was still coming. They gave me one more chance, their voices low and firm, thinking maybe they could scare me into submission. But fear had lost its grip on me the moment the first bullet shattered the farmhouse door. When they moved to force the issue, the vines stirred. Not violently. Not yet. Just enough to send a ripple through the earth, a whisper that even the most closed-minded could feel if they were paying attention. They hesitated. For the first time, they hesitated. I could see it, the flicker of doubt, the questioning of their orders. The lead agent recovered quickly. He barked new commands. 3 men broke off to circle around the back of the house. 2 more stayed close to the front, hands twitching near their sidearms. The leader approached me, one hand extended in a mockery of diplomacy. I didn't move. The ground under his feet shifted slightly, and he stumbled, just for a moment, just enough for the mask of control to slip. They made their move together, coordinated, professional. But no training could prepare them for the will of something older and wilder than anything they'd ever faced. The roots burst from the soil, seizing ankles and wrists, dragging them backward. Weapons clattered uselessly to the ground. Shouts filled the air, sharp and panicked. I didn't lift a finger. I didn't have to. The plant wasn't just defending itself anymore. It was defending us, me, this land, everything we had fought for in those brutal nights. The agents tried to call for backup, but the vines crushed their radios with a casual, almost contemptuous strength. One by one, they were disarmed, disoriented, disarmed not just of weapons but of purpose. They had walked in thinking they were the masters of every situation. They left realizing there were forces that couldn't be controlled, that wouldn't bend or break under a badge or a gun. Afterward, when the farm was quiet again, I sat down on the porch steps and stared at the horizon. It wasn't victory I felt. It wasn't relief. It was a heavy, bone-deep sadness for how inevitable this all was. For how, even when shown the miracle of new life, the first instinct was always to capture, dissect, weaponize. Humanity had been given 1,000 chances to choose wonder over fear, and almost every time, fear won. I thought about the twins. About how they had trusted me with their gift, their legacy. How their eyes had shimmered with the simple, aching hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would be worthy of it. I hadn't been special. I hadn't been chosen because of some grand destiny. I had just been the one who stayed. The one who listened. The one who, when faced with something vast and terrifying and beautiful, chose to reach out a hand instead of raising a weapon. The plant brushed against my side, a soft touch, like reassurance. It was growing stronger every day, learning, adapting. Soon, it wouldn't need me at all. It would find its place in this battered world, roots digging deep, branches reaching toward skies that had forgotten how to hope. But I knew the agents would come back. They would come back with tanks, with helicopters, with orders written in the bloodless language of fear. They would call it a threat, a contagion, a national security risk. They would gather scientists and soldiers and politicians and build walls around the very thing that could have saved them. That was the great tragedy, the quiet horror threading through every heartbeat of this story. I wouldn't be here forever. Sooner or later, they would break me, or bury me, or wipe this place clean as if it had never existed. But until that day came, I would fight. I would be the last line of defense between their world and ours. I would be the stubborn voice that said no, that said not everything had to be owned or crushed. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. Maybe the memory of it, the stubborn refusal, the bloodied hope, would survive long after the last vine had withered and the last stone had crumbled. Maybe someone else would find the seeds we planted here. Maybe they would choose wonder over fear. Maybe. As the sun sank behind the hills, the first stars flickered into existence overhead. I leaned back, feeling the pulse of the living earth beneath me, and allowed myself a small, exhausted smile. They thought they understood what power was. They didn't even know what life looked like when it decided it would not be conquered. Not now. Not Eve. They came at dawn, like cowards pretending to be heroes, thinking maybe the light would save them from the darkness they carried. Black helicopters sliced the sky apart, armored trucks rolled down the broken road, and soldiers spilled out like a tide that knew only how to destroy. They wore patches of flags they had long forgotten how to honor, badges heavy with the lies they told themselves at night. I watched from the porch, cold coffee in hand, the plant's roots humming against the soles of my feet. The earth itself seemed to hold its breath. They gave no warnings this time. No offers. No clipboard lies. Just orders barked into radios and guns pointed with the certainty of men who believed violence would fix everything. I didn't run. There was nowhere to go. I didn't hide. I had stopped being afraid the moment the twins looked up at me with those impossible eyes and decided, somehow, that I was worth trusting. What they had given me wasn't just life. It was responsibility. It was a silent plea wrapped in roots and hope: don't let them kill what we left behind. The first missile struck the front field, blowing apart the remains of the old oak tree. They wanted to scare me, to shatter the land first, weaken it. But they didn't understand. This land wasn't weak anymore. It had tasted defiance. It had swallowed blood and pain and decided to grow stronger from it. The vines didn't lash out this time. They didn't attack. They simply endured. Wrapped themselves deep around the foundations, knitted into the bedrock, became part of something far older than any machine these men could build. The soldiers moved in, slow and cautious, expecting ambushes, expecting monsters. All they found was a man too tired to hate them and a force they could never tame. They shouted at me to get down, to surrender, to submit. I stayed standing. I looked into their faces, and what I saw wasn't cruelty, not really. It was fear. Fear that everything they had been taught about control, about dominance, was breaking apart in front of them. Bullets tore into the house, splintering wood, shattering glass. They tore into the ground, into the walls, into the very memory of this place. But they couldn't touch the heart of it. They couldn't kill what they couldn't even understand. The plant didn't strike back. It just held firm, absorbing the shock, the fire, the fury. It didn't want to kill. It wanted to live. And somehow, in the face of all their rage, that simple act of survival became the most powerful form of rebellion. They dragged me down eventually. Beat me with fists and rifle butts until the world spun and blood filled my mouth. They shackled my wrists, barked numbers into their radios, treating me like a threat, a disease to be contained. But they couldn't hide the truth from themselves anymore. They stepped carefully around the vines. They flinched at every creak of the earth. They knew. Somewhere deep in the animal parts of their brains, they knew. They weren't in control anymore. They never really had been. They loaded me into the back of a truck, cuffs biting into my skin. As the vehicle jolted forward, I twisted enough to catch one last glimpse of the farmhouse. Smoke rising from shattered windows. Vines curling gently around broken beams. And in that moment, something inside me broke, not with despair, but with pride so fierce it almost hurt to breathe. They could crush the wood, the stone, even the man. But they couldn't touch the roots. They couldn't touch the promise whispered into the soil. The twins had planted something more powerful than any weapon humanity had ever built. They had planted hope. Wild, stubborn, relentless hope. And hope doesn't die just because you tear down the house it lives in. The days that followed blurred together. Interrogations in sterile rooms. Needles and electrodes. Questions spat through clenched teeth. Where had it come from? How did it work? Was it a weapon? Could it be replicated? They begged, threatened, cajoled. But I gave them nothing. Not out of spite. Not out of stubbornness. But because what they wanted wasn't mine to give. They thought they could own it, dissect it, chain it like a dog. But life doesn't work that way. Not real life. Not the kind the twins had left behind. They transferred me to a black site eventually, deep underground where the sun never reached. A place meant to make people disappear. But the joke was on them. I had already been forgotten by the world long before any of this happened. I was nobody. A man clinging to a dying farm at the edge of nowhere. They thought taking away my freedom would break me. They didn't understand that freedom wasn't a place you stood. It was something you carried inside you, where no handcuffs could ever reach. Weeks turned into months. They poked and prodded, desperate for secrets that didn't exist. And all the while, the plant grew. I could feel it, even from 1,000 miles away. In dreams, in whispers at the edge of hearing. It spread beneath the surface, roots digging deeper, vines slipping through cracks no one noticed. It touched forgotten fields, broken cities, empty roads. It found other people like me, the lonely, the lost, the stubborn. And it gave them what it gave me, a choice. To reach out instead of recoil. To protect instead of destroy. To hope. By the time they realized the truth, it was too late. You can't kill an idea once it's taken root in the soil of the human heart. You can't burn away a future that has already begun to bloom in 1,000 secret gardens. They thought they were dealing with a single plant, a single anomaly. They didn't understand they were facing the oldest force in the universe, life refusing to die. I never saw the twins again. Maybe they moved on to other worlds. Maybe they simply became part of the thing they left behind. It doesn't matter. What matters is the promise we made without ever speaking it aloud. That we would protect the miracle they gave us, even if it cost us everything. And when my time came, when the cold fluorescent lights dimmed, and my heart slowed, and the last breath rattled out of me, I didn't feel fear. I felt the earth humming beneath me. I felt the vines weaving through the cracks in the concrete. I felt the stars burning bright above a world that would, against every odd, learn to bloom again. They thought they buried me. They were wrong. I became the roots. I became the whisper in the soil. I became the hope they could never kill. And somewhere, out there in the wide, battered world, something green and wild and beautiful is still growing. Because we stayed. Because we fought. Because we believed. Because life always finds a way.